Late last April, in his first speech to a joint session of Congress, President Biden officially announced his $1.8 trillion American Families Plan, which, among other things, would add 4 more years of free public education to the universal schooling for K through 12 students.
12 years is no longer enough today to compete with the rest of the world in the 21st century. That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America, starting as early as we can.
Is public education at earlier ages really what America needs? Now, let's put the indoctrination that we've been talking about aside for a moment. Let's talk about if the schools were just teaching the basics. Is it the best thing for America's kids? Well, the answer to that question is no. According to a newly reported reports from a study, it's the first well-controlled long-term study that has ever been conducted of a statewide publicly supported preschool program. I mean, the credentials of the teachers were impeccable. The curriculum had been reviewed. This was the perfect scenario to give kids, quote unquote, a head start. Well, here to talk about this is Dr. Katharine Stevens. She's the founder and CEO of the Center on Child and Family Policy, which aims to advance the well-being of young children and their families through conducting rigorous research, providing evidence-based analysis, and fostering a more robust competition of ideas in early childhood policy. Dr. Stevens, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, I doubt that you were surprised by this, but this study out of Tennessee is pretty remarkable as it lays out the case that what the government is pursuing doesn't work.
Well, in one way, people find this study surprising because its results are not the same as a lot of other research because this was a much more rigorous study. However, the findings of this study are consistent with what we would expect given what we know about early human development, which is that a school environment, a group institutional setting, is not optimal for early childhood development.
You know, we hear a lot about following the evidence, the science, and the social science. Pretty clear, in fact, interesting that Germany, that did studies on this back in the 70s, rejected this idea of early childhood education. But again, this is a pretty broad study, and you're right. You're absolutely right. This builds upon previous studies that have been done. But in this study, coming out of Vanderbilt, what I find fascinating about this is a pretty big study. I mean, 3,000 children were involved in the study. It looked at them over an extended period of time. And the bottom line, well, I'm going to let you tell our viewers and our listeners what the bottom line of the findings of this exhaustive study were.
So the bottom line of the findings is that right after these researchers compared 2 groups of children. One group was admitted to pre-K, but there weren't enough spaces for all the kids. So there were about a little over half the kids got into pre-K. The other kids had parents who had wanted to get them into pre-K. However, there were not enough spaces. So the researchers used this to compare these 2 groups of children, all of whom had parents who were trying to get them into pre-K. One group went to pre-K, the other group did not go to pre-K. What they found was that at the beginning of kindergarten, the children who had gone to pre-K had slightly stronger skills. They knew a few more letters, a few more numbers. However, what's really valuable about this study is it's a controlled study in the way that I just described, which is kind of the gold standard of research and not done much in early childhood. And these researchers have been following the children, the pre-K group and the not pre-K group, now up through 6th grade. What they found by 3rd grade is that the children who had attended pre-K were doing slightly worse on achievement, like math and reading achievement tests. What concerned the researchers at the third grade point was that they were seeing some evidence of behavior issues with the pre-K group that they didn't see in the non-pre-K group. The report that's just come out is reporting after sixth grade. And what they found was that still the children who attended pre-K are doing a little worse in terms of basic academic skills. However, they're doing a lot worse. The pre-K group, the kids who went to pre-K are doing a lot worse than the kids who did not in terms of discipline issues, behavior issues, and the problems that the pre-K group is having have gotten worse since third grade. So the longer they've been in school, the worse these problems have become. So what this tells us is that attending pre-K did not help them in their elementary school experience. As a matter of fact, it seems to have hurt them.
So it's like it gave them an initial boost of energy, but it quickly ran out and they fell behind their peers. Now, going back to the design of this study, I mean, it is a randomized controlled experiment, two groups. So, for those, and these are coming from lower income groups. So it's all the same. So, I mean, these everything, when you look at everything, it is a level playing field. So you can't say, well, they're doing bad because they had this or they didn't have this. I mean, we're looking at this and you see this gap expanding over time. I'm curious, are they going to continue to look beyond the sixth grade to whether or not we go to the 12th grade to see if these kids make it all the way through, if they have additional behavior issues? Are they going to continue the study?
I think so. As I understand it, the Tennessee state legislature authorized additional funding for the study several years ago as they were seeing these really valuable results. Another thing that you'll hear is often, if you're just reading the newspaper, there is frequently said that a large body of research shows that pre-K, quote, works. But along the lines of what you were just explaining, the difference with this study, and there's only one other study that's been done like this, is you're comparing apples to apples. So as you said, it's just an absolute level playing field. The way these studies are usually done is they take a large group of kids in high school, say, and they see how each group's doing. And then they find out, had those children gone to pre-K? So some kids had gone to pre-K, some kids had not gone to pre-K. However, that's not apples to apples because pre-K is voluntary. So what that means is that the children who had gone to pre-K, what that tells us is they had parents who made a big effort to get them into pre-K, right?
Right.
And
right.
So the outcomes that are reported and attributed to pre-K are actually, it's much more logical that those outcomes are actually telling us something about parents. So in other words, attending pre-K doesn't cause those outcomes. It may predict them because it shows that this family is particularly interested in education, particularly engaged with their child's education, which research has shown is the number one factor in children's academic success.
Yeah, don't get me started on that, Dr. Stevens, because we're seeing now educational establishment not wanting parents involved, when in fact we have abundance of research that says that's a determining factor in the success of a child. But that's a rabbit. I'm not going to chase that today. I want to go back to the outcomes. You mentioned the issue of the gap in learning, behavioral issues, but there's also this report of learning disorders, that we're seeing more learning disorders among those that were in the pre-K program. Now, Some, a lot of these things we don't know the exact reason for. A lot of it's speculation, but some suggest it could in part be because of labels that we put on kids as they make their way through the process. Can you talk to that?
Yes. So I guess it's probably not correct to say that they have more learning disorders. We don't know what they have or don't have. What they have is more as you've just suggested, diagnoses of learning disorders. And research has suggested that children getting a diagnosis is actually detrimental. Not always, but in a lot of cases.
So let me give, Dr. Stevens, not to cut you off, but let me give you a scenario. Mm-hmm. So you're taking these kids and you're corralling them in a classroom, these young kids who need to be outside playing, throwing sticks and climbing up walls and doing things that kids do to get that energy out and to explore and to learn and to develop their skills. So you're confining them into a room and they don't like to sit still. And they're not really responsive to a teacher, and so you put a label on them as being ADD or whatever, and that begins to be a shaping label upon that child, does it not?
Yes, and plus there's just more time in school for teachers to diagnose them, right? I used to work in K-12, Tony, and I observed that when teachers were not good at their job, they were not able to teach. Some, not all, but some, went to great lengths to establish that it's not their fault, it's the fault of the kid. And that is where, in some cases, that's where these diagnoses come in, is a teacher is having a trouble, just exactly as you said, partly because the child is not in a developmentally appropriate environment. And perhaps also the teacher is just not good, right? And teachers, when you give a child a diagnosis, they are often taken out of your classroom either altogether or for long periods of time, so you don't have to deal with them. So it is that's the fact that they have been diagnosed with more learning disabilities does not appear to be a good sign. It's going to be very interesting, as you've said, to see as they're followed forward how that plays out when they're older.
I'm just thankful that when I was a kid in school that they didn't have all those labels, because my school file was not big enough to contain all of the labels they would have put on me. Look, it's the reality of creative kids. I was joking the other day, I get paid for what I used to get sent to the hall for today. We have to let the individual child develop. And that's a part of I think the problem with public education in particular is that we put all of the kids into a single mold, and moving it even to a younger age where these kids do not have an opportunity to develop their own personality, their own style. We're putting them into this mold at the earliest of ages. And I think this is extremely alarming to the effect that this had not only on the kids, but I think on the creative nature of America that has made our economy work and has made us a successful nation, that all of a sudden we're producing these educational clones by putting these kids in these academic settings so early in life.
Yeah, well, there's nothing in developmental science that suggests that putting 4-year-olds or 3-year-olds or even younger children in group institutional settings is what they need to develop well. It's just not what developmental science tells us. My theory on this is as follows. Up until the mid-1960s, the public schools were a building that kids went to learn basic skills, as they used to say, reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was a very discrete, particular thing that the schools did. During the War on Poverty, it was actually Lyndon Johnson was the first to suggest that the public schools would be the vehicle for upward mobility in our society. that public schools would solve poverty. That was not something that we thought in America before the 1960s. Since the 1960s, we have come to equate human development with schooling. We never used to think that. For all of human history, we never equated human development with schooling. That has become such a binding way of thinking. We don't even realize we're thinking it anymore. Obviously, spending on the schools has gone up and up and up. As we are now understanding, for very good reasons, how absolutely crucial early childhood is, we're understanding that early development is very important. Because we're used to thinking of school, when we're now focused on early childhood, we think early school.
Right.
So we are confusing early development with early school.
And the outcome of that could be disastrous for the children and for the nation. Dr. Stevens, I hate to say it, but we're out of time. I've enjoyed our conversation. We'll have you back on and we'll talk more about it. Thanks so much for being with us.
I'd be delighted. Thank you.